It's kind of depressing. If you want a depressing quiz, let me know. I'll build one around it. So what you got here, and this was actually a study done, I want to say, it's tied to UC, Santa Clara? UCSC? What's UCSC?
Southern Cal.
Southern Cal?
Maybe.
Yeah, sure. I think it was actually tied originally back to an East Coast study, but a sample was done of Americans, and they were asked, what would you think the ideal wealth distribution would be? What would the ideal wealth distribution to be? Now, the five colors would be levels of the bottom 20% of wealthy folks. So the poorest 20%, the next poorest 20%, or the next richest 20%, the next richest, based on numbers. So take however wealth is measured, and I'm not exactly sure how they're measuring wealth, if it's just annual salary, if it's salary plus investments, I'm not sure. But if you took all that, put it in a line, and then put 5 demarcations in the line, those would create quintiles. Okay? So they were asked, what would your ideal separation be? And this was the ideal separation. Now, when you look at those 5 boxes, this one is definitely larger than this one. But there's a kind of a uniformity to it almost, implying that people would desire an ideal breakup of wealth that is basically uniform. Like there'd be 10% of the poorest people, you'd have 30% the richest people, and then you'd have these breakups of the middle, rich, poor people somewhat uniformly. This is what actually happens. This is what actually happens. Meaning that the top 20%, the richest 20% actually own over 80% of the wealth that's out there to own. You remember the Pareto diagram we talked about way back on the first couple days of class? This is what he was getting at. 80% of the wealth is held by 20% of the people. Funnily enough, that was said over 150 years ago, and yet here it is still being observed. This is what I don't know what this estimated is. I forget what this is, but the estimate is somewhere between the ideal and the actual. So it goes to show you how little we know about what's actually going on until you go out to actually measure it. Back to Carolyn's point, you can't come to a snap conclusion on anything without careful measurement. This is what people want. That's what's actually happening. Where the hell, I mean, I only see 3 bars. The other ones must be so small they're compressed down, I'm guessing, which means that I'm guessing the poorest 20%, I think we're missing these 2, which means that poorest 40% of people own nothing. Nothing measurable, anyway. That's depressing. I think that's depressing. No, I think it's depressing. It depends. Why do I say that?
Because you're not exactly sure what they're...
I'm not sure what wealth is. You know? I mean, there are plenty of people that are completely happy having absolutely next to nothing. I've met a lot of climbers that are like that. They got nothing around their van. I'm sure that if you have a van and nothing else but a rack of climbing gear, and you're traveling the country climbing anywhere you want to climb, whenever you want to climb, they're perfectly happy doing that. So you can't equate happiness to wealth. But you can equate certain levels of things like eating to wealth. And that's where I get nervous seeing stuff like that, because there's probably also other correlations like disease, early death, childhood disorders that are tied to lack of wealth. I'm assuming. So there's quintiles for you. Kind of depressing. I'm sorry, it's a depressing one the more I think about it. Anyway, there's a quintile. So you lost your median, but that's okay. You've got these five divisions instead of 4 divisions. Would you want a quiz based on something like that? I guess we can't do it. We just did the quiz. Anything I would have asked you, we just did. Sure, let's do it now. All right, anyway, better than that. Let's do an in-class quiz together.